Okay, here we go. This is week 9. And let's get started with our innovation of the week. And I think some of you, this is like the only thing you really like to watch, which is fine. Let's see. So, innovation. Uh, so, we've been looking at all these kind of invention type things, but this one is a new sport. Okay. So you may not be good at football, you may not be good at baseball, swimming, track and field. What about simulated skydiving? Okay, so it's choreographed music. I should probably just let you hear a little bit.
Pleasure to be around. Here we go.
So obviously, this is a very bougie sport, shall we say. So it's gymnastics in the air, I guess. I would probably throw up if I tried to do this, but it's actually pretty cool. You can Google it. This is the title of the thing. So it's called Win Games, right? And for a few years now, they've been having world championships and things like that. And as far as the last time I checked, let me turn this down a little bit. So last time I checked, there's no age leagues, right? Everyone competes against each other. And obviously certain people have an advantage over other people. But nevertheless, it's kind of cool, right? So you can invent a new sport is what I'm trying to say, right? So it's not just simply, gadgets and gizmos and machines, but you can also try to come up with a new kind of sport and then make world championships with it, right? That's what I used to think that short track was, right? So Koreans couldn't do the speed skating stuff because they just couldn't compete with the physicality there, and everyone else was just way too developed. And so they really jumped on the whole short track thing, where a lot of the muscularity, size, physical size is not as important in that sport. And so they started, I don't know, when it first started going into the Olympics, they started winning Koreans started winning all the gold medals and stuff. And so it's about that. It's about coming up with a new sport, exploiting it, and then trying to make something of it. Okay, so that's that. And you can watch the video, do a little bit, Google that and check that out in case you're interested in doing, simulated wind skydiving type stuff. Anyway, all right. Now, there's another innovation because there's only after this week, there's only 3 more weeks that we actually have material that you're going to be posting on and whatnot. So the next thing to look at, where are we? There we go. If you know anything about retirement homes, you know that they're really, really expensive. And so what we got here is these people are planning to retire at a Holiday Inn. Now, I know some of you are too classy to retire at a Holiday Inn, but if you think about it, it's a lot cheaper if you think in terms of cost comparison, right? Because they do your laundry, right? They clean your sheets every day, and it's a lot cheaper. And in fact, if you go out to breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it's still cheaper than being at a nursing home. So if you're still have a lot of ability to get around, be independent, why not go to retire at a Holiday Inn instead of going to one of these nursing homes? I always wonder if you are allowed to decorate your room, excuse me, if you do something like that. I thought that was kind of interesting. Also, next, what we got have a bunch of innovations for you. So a lot of people in the previous weeks have asked me, well, how would the free market deal with something like healthcare or something like that? And so if you look on the study guide, you'll see that there is a link to a video, which is basically the free market alternative.
took a note.
Free market alternative to basically healthcare through the government. Okay, and these guys, basically it's free market healthcare. If you look for these doctors exemplify the virtues of free market medicine, really cool. Okay, and so my wife and I, after we saw this, because they had updated, there was a surgery center for major surgeries. They pretty much do not accept any insurance at all, which makes it a lot cheaper. I know it's kind of counterintuitive, but it's insurance being forced to accept insurance policies, use government regulations, which drives up the costs of healthcare. In fact, one of the things that they talk about here in this video is that the regular average doctor in their private practice must see 30 patients a day in order to make a profit, right? 30 patients per day. And so you only have a few minutes to spend with each patient. So they're like constantly trying to get you in and out. And it's not a very good customer experience. These guys, because they're free market, they only need to see 10 patients per day in order to start making money. And the costs are so much cheaper. I'll let you, if you're interested, you can check that out. Also, if you're pre-med, that's what it was. Some of you were pre-med, and then you were thinking about what are some free market alternatives or possibilities for you as you go pursue medicine. And some of these guys, they'll say, don't go into medicine. But if you do, this might be a pretty cool way of doing it. And there were a couple old students that I had from way back in the day. They're practicing medicine. They're getting all burned out. And so I shared this link. Hopefully, it'll be somehow beneficial to them. By the way, the video playing behind me is the cheese rolling competition. I don't know if you heard about that, but yeah, I thought it'd be a good video for Sun Tzu this week. All right, next up, what we got? So just a couple other comments. There were a lot of things I forgot to include in the videos last week. I was trying to get everything as short as possible. And so there were a lot of things that I didn't get to. One of the things was this, and I put the links in the study guide, but it's the secret pact. Okay, so here, I'll share this in 1 second. So it's a secret pact. So what a lot of people don't realize is that when China had the Great Leap Forward, it created mass starvation, right? And so basically, because of the whole Marxist dream of everyone being farmers and going back to that farm life and everything, they pretty much forced everyone to move out of the cities. Orchestra players, you had to become farmers, right? So you were a violinist, well, now you're a farmer. And basically, violin players do not make good farmers, okay? It's a completely different line of work, totally different different requirements in order to do the work. And so crops failed. Lots of people started starving. And one of the things that, and so some people will say 100 million people died of starvation in China alone because they were trying to create this communist utopia in China. And so that's kind of the downside. Obviously, if you're okay with 100 million people dying, I guess this is for you. But people who are starving to death, this might not be what they desire. And so this document that is being discussed in this article, if you're interested in reading, I'll just give you an overview. These farmers realized that they were going to starve to death and that their children, their families were probably going to starve to death. So what they did was they had a secret meeting in the middle of the night, when the government, narc was asleep. They got together and they made a secret pact, a secret agreement that starting the next day, they were going to farm not as a collective, not as a group, but as individuals. So each family gets their plot of farmland and they now have to compete against each other. And so basically they decided that, well, they were going to starve to death anyway. So death by execution, because if they start competing, that's capitalism, and you can't do that in China. So it's either starve to death, with no food, or be executed because you're starting to do capitalism. Uh, Either way, you're going to be dead. But at least if we do it this way, there'll be food and not all of us will be executed. And so the secret pact was that not only would they start, basically farming independent of each other, each family would not cooperate and work with each other, but they would start, working on their own property of farm. But when at the end of the growing season, they knew that they were going to get busted, right? They knew. And so the agreement was that when they do get busted and a bunch of them get arrested and executed, that everyone who's left behind promises to take care of their families, right? Because they're not going to be there anymore to feed them, to take care of them. So that was the secret agreement, that after they were executed, that everyone else in the town would take care of their families. Really, really crazy, powerful thing. But the thing is, right, this was in the 70s. The thing is, when they harvested, they had like 4 or 5 times their normal, harvest. And so when they sent the numbers and the figures to Beijing, the guy who saw it was, I believe, Deng Xiaoping, who's the one who started to reintroduce capitalism into China, right? Because then he realized, well, this collective stuff doesn't work. You basically incentivize laziness, and so basically he started to reintroduce capitalism, through this secret pact. It's a pretty cool read. You should check it out if you want. If you want. All right. Now, how bad was socialism and communism? Well, first of all, a lot of people were saying, what's the difference between the two? And I answered a bunch of people before I realized that they were asking something different. But in the 1950s and 60s, when people were going after communists, right, and basically making them unemployable, the whole McCarthyism and stuff like that, people realized that they can't call themselves communists anymore, and so they started calling themselves socialists, right? And so in America, at least anyway, the two ideas, socialism, democratic socialism, or communism, yeah, it's pretty much the same. I mean, they'll tell you there's big differences, but essentially in terms of their goals, where they want to end up, it's pretty much the same. And so what was it? Marx himself said, is socialism a middle class movement and communism is a working class movement. Again, as I said before, America is not a class society, right? We have expressions like upper class, middle class, lower class, but these are not immovable categories or classes. Like we have social mobility here in the United States, and so people can change their socioeconomic status, unlike England at the time that Marx was writing. Okay. So let's see. Lockdowns are kind of like communism, right? The government says you're not allowed out of your house, and so that pretty much is how it is, which is why it's kind of not very welcome by a lot of people who are more free-minded. And I know there's lots of debate and everything, but in America, everyone has a choice whether or not they're going to stay home or not. And I know people get all crazy about that, but that's the way it should be. Let's see. And then if you think about it, how many people died? So the lockdowns itself caused a lot of death. And I've said this before, lots of starvation, not here necessarily in America, but in other countries, right? Because the supply chains were all, broken. A lot of people were shut down. The food wasn't getting to where it needed to go, especially in the poor countries. A lot of people starved to death. A lot of babies starved to death. A lot of babies couldn't get the drugs and the medicine that they needed in order to get better, so they died as well. But historically, you can see that when people try to implement this kind of communistic kind of framework, that millions of people die. So in the Ukraine, I forget the number, but I think it's kind of north of 10 million. It might be around 9 million people died of starvation. when all the crops failed. So Russia came into the Ukraine and basically took all their food. And so all the Ukrainians, a lot of them starved to death, which is kind of why in America, if you know Ukrainians and Russian Ukrainians. So in the Ukraine, there are Russian speaking Ukrainians and the Ukrainian speaking Ukrainians. They hate each other. Okay. And it comes back to this kind of stuff where, a lot of a lot of Russians settled in the Ukraine. And then also Russia took away a lot of their food and millions of people died. And so that kind of leaves a bitter taste in your mouth. Cuba, a small island, about obviously not millions of people died, but tens of thousands of people died. Che Guevara, who a lot of people love wearing his face on their shirt, he hated blacks and homosexuals, and he personally would execute homosexuals. Right? He just absolutely hated them, and it's kind of interesting because a lot of people who apparently don't do a lot of research. They think he's an awesome guy and they put his face on there. He was a mass murderer, so he was a kind of a sick dude. So I don't know, but there it is. Vietnam, after the Vietnam War, 1 to 2 million people, over 2 million, were put into re-education camps. And this kind of comes back to a question or comment that kept coming up last week, that, hey, wouldn't it be awesome to have a one-party system? Now think about that for a second. How do you get a one-party system? In America, how would you be able to get a one-party system? Well, you got to arrest everyone in the other party, right? And then because since they're all arrested, they're in jail or they were executed, everyone else falls in line. That's how you get a one-party system, right? So it's not by persuasion, but it is extreme coercion. A lot of people don't realize this, but that's how the revolution is supposed to happen, right? You kill a lot of people in the opposition party. So, up to 2.5 million people, especially the people who used to be in the South Vietnamese army fighting with America, politicians, all these people who collaborated with America while they were fighting the war. Well, they all couldn't leave. And so basically 2 million of them were rounded up. Was it something like 300,000 people died in these work camps? So re-education camps is basically a work camp. And so they worked you to death. And that's what happened in Vietnam. Cambodia, there was a movie made in the 1980s. It was called The Killing Fields. And it was a story about the Pol Pot, who was a communist ruler who took over there after the Vietnam War. And he executed 2 million people. And he dragged them all out in the same place and then executed 2 million people. And Cambodia is not even that big in terms of population, and he just executed 2 million people. And so you see fields and fields of skulls everywhere, and that's, and in the 80s we all watched that movie, and so people who lived in that time period saw that movie. That's why a lot of people really are not really into or looking forward to communism. Some of you, well, actually one of you, talked about Uzbekistan, and that their parents were from Uzbekistan, and that's one of the states that the Soviet Union took, that Russia took over and made part of the Soviet Union. But Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, I hope I'm pronouncing them right. There are two countries, two independent countries. They were sort of lumped together, and then a line was arbitrarily drawn. And so Uzbeks who were living in Tajikistan had to call themselves Tajiks, and then the Tajiks who were living in Uzbekistan had to call themselves Uzbeks. It was very, very coercive, not a very nice situation. And that's what I think is kind of surprising, is that so many people in the United States are from former communist countries. And these places was just absolutely miserable and awful, unless you were part of the government, okay? So in other words, if you were from the Eastern Bloc countries or one of these former Soviet states, it was awful living there, because you had no freedom. But the people who loved it, obviously, were the people connected with government because they were able to have all the privileges, all the food and all this other kind of stuff. And so they loved it. And they're kind of really upset that the Soviet Union is no more, but there it is. And so that's how you're going to be able to see people who are in favor of it versus people who don't like it. And so that's how you get one party. You have to basically force everyone to join the same party, which is why, at least in my mind anyway, and a lot of people, that's why people are trying to do away with the Second Amendment, right? It's a lot easier to round people up and put them into forced labor camps if they can't defend themselves, right? And this is kind of why, at least a lot of people will say that the people who started this country made sure that there was a Second Amendment so that when the government starts to take away, interfere with life, even start to try to arrest people arbitrarily, people can fight back. That's what the Second Amendment is actually for. You go to certain states and people are doing that. They're taking up arms against government agencies, which is really pissing off the government, which is why you get a lot of this gun control stuff that's going on. That's at least another perspective, something that a lot of people will say. Another thing that came up a lot in the discussion board posts last week was that the bottom 20%. And you got to realize that when, you can't look at it, the bottom 20% as a class. It's not a class of people, the bottom 20%. It's just people who happen at this moment, income-wise, are in the bottom 20%. But the thing is that 60% of the people who are in the bottom 20% right now will no longer be in the bottom 20% 5 years from now. And that's not so surprising because college students are part of the bottom 20%. Okay, so because most people have no income or very little income, you don't have your career, you don't have your full-time job yet. And so you're at the bottom in terms of income. Not surprising, but after graduation, most of you are going to get jobs, right? So within 5 years of being in the bottom 20%, most people come out of that bottom 20%, okay? But more people are coming into that bottom 20%, right? As soon as you go into college, you turn 18, now you're part of the bottom 20%. Also, people who are in the top 20%, a lot of them, especially this past year when their business went bankrupt, right? They had to shut down because of the lockdown. They lost their business, they lost everything. Now they're in the bottom 20%, okay? So that's social mobility, probably not the best kind of social mobility, but nevertheless, that's what it is. And so those are some of the comments and also some things that I forgot to mention last week. And obviously you can pretty much look up the statistics yourself. I always try to lowball it. That way no one can ever accuse me of exaggerating. But yeah, there are a lot of people that died as a result of trying to implement a lot of this stuff because people don't want to give up their private property. And so they're going to try to fight back, which means, yeah, you're going to have lots of executions. Kind of awkward to say that, but it is, in fact, something to look forward to if it ever happens here in the United States. Let's see, Sun Tzu, as I don't know, that's my Chinese imitation of a Chinese person trying to saying it correctly. Obviously I don't speak Chinese, but Zi is not his last name. It's a title, okay? So you can't say Zi was saying, it's like saying sir, right? So Sir Winston Churchill, or Sir Billy Joel, or whoever, or Sir Elton John, or whatever, right? It's a title, right? And I know people are still going to do that. They're going to say, well, Sue says it's a title. It's not his name. Well, he lived 2,500 years ago. And the story goes is that he was a traveling advisor. And then finally the emperor heard about him, that he was such an awesome general. And so he hired him to be the general of his army. And if you read, I think the intro, the copy that I uploaded, and there are other copies, the PDFs everywhere. you can check out some more of the backstory, but it's pretty brutal. So I don't know if you want to read that or not, but he was pretty, yeah, he's pretty cut and dry. All right, now let's see. Uh, I am just going to go through. So it's 2,500 years ago. We're still reading it today. Why? Because it's relevant to us today. And some of you may already know this. I think business students have to read it. Uh, law students have to. I don't know. Lots of people read this, not just military types. And just so you know, I think, yeah, everyone can take something away from Sun Tzu. And those of you who had me for IH1, we did Lao Tzu. And so it's very similar to Lao Tzu. And so you can tap into your Dao De Jing memories and, lessons and kind of help you to understand this or not. But nevertheless, there it is. So I'm going to go up to chapter 3 in this video and then finish it out in the other video. So there's only 2 videos this week. And like I said, next week is going to be work on your paper week, right? So just sort of take stock of things, spend some time on your more important classes, right? And then we'll have 3 weeks where we're doing stuff. Galileo, which is not that long, Wollstonecraft, and then Thucydides. Just 3 more weeks of material, and then you're done with me and this class. There it is. So I front loaded most of the work, and so towards the end of the semester, you can focus on your other classes where I'm sure there's a lot of work, your paper for this class, and then you're done. Okay. So I'm only go up to chapter 3. So here it is. So let's look at Art of War. First of all, Art of War. Why is it called Art of War? So the first thing we got to do is what is war, right? And so a lot of people will imagine war to be some sort of fighting, lots of killing, whatever, which is part of it. But our reset definition of what war would be is conflict or competition, right? So, right, we can be at war. I found out I got voles here at the church, right? So voles are these, they look like mice, but they eat all the roots of everything. They destroy your lawn, whatever. And so I declared war against the voles, VOLES. You might have them too. They're not moles, they're voles. But anyway, but you can be at war with your friends, especially if you're competing for the same thing. So right now, you may have friends and you're like, oh, we're BFFs or whatever you guys say these days, until you're both competing for the same objective. Maybe you're both applying to the same job. You're both applying to the same school. One person gets in, the other person doesn't get in. Why? How did that work, right? Well, see, on a certain level, you guys are friends. But on another level, you guys are competition, right? In fact, if you think about it, everyone else in the class is competition for you in some way. And so therefore, that is war. So anytime where there's competition or conflict of any kind, this is war, which basically means Sun Tzu can be used in all of those situations, whether it's sport, employment, family attention, whatever, marriage, right? You need the art of war. So then why are we talking about art? What is art? And a lot of people have, and maybe if you're in Tyler school, you have different definitions and understanding, but in the reset Dr. Kim perspective, art basically is creativity. Okay, so creative expression within a given field. So within competition, we're going to try to become creative, right? And some of you, maybe you're already where I'm trying to go. Some of you are like, I don't get it, which is fine. But falls in line with this whole out of the box goal and objective, right? So we're in conflict, we're living life in this world. How do you get ahead? And if you're asking that question, especially the competitive types out there, you can't be socialists, right? Right? Because if you are having a competitive spirit and you want to be better than other people, you want to be in front of other people, well, there goes equality, right? And so in this competitive world, how do you get ahead? How do you get sort of one step ahead of the competition or ahead of the curve, as it were? You have to be creative. And that pretty much is what I've been saying all semester. You have to get out of your box. You have to recognize what's going on and then figure out what to do. This is the art of war. If you look at the first, the first chapter, oops, let me bring this up. First chapter, shoot. He says, sorry. In the first line, chapter 1, it's like arranged like scripture verses, right? So you got chapters and verses, okay? But it's basically numbered by the translator, so it makes it easy for everyone to sort of relate it. And so if you look at the study guide, I put in the line numbers under with the chapter numbers, so it's easy to find what I'm referring to. And since this semester we're all using the same translation, the same PDF, or at least most of us are anyway, unless you bought the book, then it should be easy to reference, okay? So the art of war is of vital importance to the state. Okay, what's the state? And most people will say, well, country, the government of a country. But keep in mind, what is the state? And if you think that this can be applied in any given situation, including you trying to get a job, you trying to get employed after graduation, or you trying to get a higher grade than other people in the class. The state is you, your brain, your individuality. And so the art of war, creativity in competition, is of vital importance to the individual. That's how you can kind of read it, okay? And if you put that in your head, that this is actually not a life guide, but sort of a guide on how to be more successful, beat your competition. All right, so the state basically can be your brain, the individual's mind, okay? Forecasting, if you look in line 14, basically says, by means of these 7 considerations, I can forecast victory or defeat. And so if you know these things which are listed in, in the previous verses, numbered passages, then you can see who's probably going to win or lose, okay? Which of the 2 sovereigns is imbued with the moral law? Which of the 2 generals has the most ability? With whom lie the advantages derived from it, et cetera, et cetera. And if you know the answer to these things, you're more than likely to know the outcome of the battle. Okay, so you're going to try to forecast, try to know ahead of time. So that way you know whether it's worth it to fight or just try to sue for peace, try to negotiate for peace. So information is really important. We can see that in chapter 1. Counselor, advice. One who has good advice acts on it, and they're the one who succeeds. And so that's what Sun Tzu is trying to say. It's like, here's the art of war. This is the advice you need to be successful. And so the person who ignores good advice, that person will always fail. Line 18, I'll call it line. All warfare is based on deception, right? You don't want to show your hand. You don't want other people to know all your strengths and weaknesses. I mean, they're competition. You don't want them to know. I use Sun Tzu all of the time, right? Casually, whatever, because everyone around me is competition. And so how do you want to be treated? How do you want to be seen? How do you basically want to fare in that competition, right? In that competitive atmosphere? Very important. And I got to tell you, one of the strategies that I like to, it's sort of like the Muhammad Ali rope-a-dope, right? But you basically try to be the dumbest person in the room. That's me, right? And so instead of drawing attention to myself, instead of always trying to stand out, I just kind of let other people take control of the conversation and just sit there and listen, right? And as my wife tells me, uh, or told me back in the day when we first met, I look like a dumb jock, right? If you just see me on the street, I look like a meathead, or a meathead wannabe, former meathead wannabe when I was younger, and so I look like an idiot. Okay, I look like a doofus. Okay, and I pretty much act like one too, obviously. And so what this does is it causes people to underestimate me every single time. And I love it. I love it when people underestimate me, and because then they just run their mouths, and I can say, "Oh, okay, that's what you want to do, okay." And then so I just get to do my thing. No one ever considers me a threat or anything, and so it's a great place to be, at least for me. Anyway, chapter 2, he goes into bankruptcy, how expensive war is. And America, you should pay attention to this, right? But war is freaking expensive. If you look at our military budget, how much we spend in Iraq and Afghanistan, it will blow your mind how much money we're spending over there. It's bankrupting the country. And if you look how expensive war was, even back in those days, that's why you try to avoid war at all costs, because you will bankrupt yourself. And going back to Machiavelli, you can't stay in power if you're bankrupt. How are you going to pay anyone? It's just not possible. And in case you didn't realize yet, but America is bankrupt. We're about $200 trillion bankrupt, right? With all the unfunded liabilities that we have here in the United States. So we are broke. And so what's everyone doing? What Trump did, what Biden is, print that money, baby. And so we're more broke, which is, I think anyway, a serious problem. It will be a serious problem. So, I'm probably wrong, but if I'm right, then bad times ahead. So enjoy those stimmy checks while they are still worth something. But yeah, bankruptcy is very, very near. So never-ending war is bad. We've been in Afghanistan at least 20 years, no end in sight, bankrupting the country. Okay. Obviously, they need to read Sun Tzu. Line 16 in chapter 2, you need to get people roused to anger. You need to get them, oh, I want to kill the enemy. But at the same time, too, on the personal level, obviously murder is not what we're talking about. But you need to, instead of looking at your friends as like, oh, he's my friend, they're not competition. Yeah, probably that's not what they're thinking. Okay, I don't know. Sometimes maybe it's possible, but then you can't account for other competition, other people that you don't know competing for the same. So you may cut each other a break. Uh, like you may say, oh, what med school are you applying to? Okay, well, then I'm going to apply different med schools. I mean, you could do this to try to prevent yourself from being competitive with people that you really like. But invariably, you are going to be competing with other people. And so what does it take? You need to really get up to that level where you're going to not take any prisoners, right? So you're going to try to beat all the competition, even if it's your family or friends. 17, this is more war oriented, but the spoils, I mention it primarily because the rules of war have changed. So in World War II, or any war really, if you fought a war, anything that you captured, that was yours, that's your stuff. And this is a military tradition that goes back even to Homer and the Iliad. If you are familiar with those pieces of literature, when you have war, that's your opportunity to become wealthy, right? You plunder things, okay? But more recent American military policy is that you're liberating people. So you can't take the stuff of the people that you're liberating. And so back in World War II, especially, and if you watch war movies like Band of Brothers or things like that, they're not allowed to steal from their allies, but from Germany, hey, go right ahead. And so people were just starting to loot everything in sight. And that's part of what war is all about. In other words, that psychological, materialistic aspect of war that a lot of people don't understand. So Sun Tzu recognizes you have to let the soldiers take stuff. Otherwise they get really, really pissed. Okay. And so even soldiers today, it's something very difficult to reconcile given look, I'm just saying that's the way it was. And because US foreign policy has changed from basically fighting evil people to liberating people, saving people, yeah, they're not allowed to take people's stuff anymore. Chapter 3, and then we'll go, I'll end it for this video, for this part. Chapter 3, Supreme Excellence, right? Oops, Supreme Excellence. And this is first 2 lines. It says, hence to fight and conquer all your battles is not supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. And this is what's kind of curious, right? So we saw this in Machiavelli, where he's actually sort of advocating that a prince get good advice so that he can avoid conflict. They can stay in power and avoid having to kill all these people, avoid having to have civil unrest and all this other kind of stuff. And we see the same pattern here with Sun Tzu, where he says, you know, being the best general is not about winning every war that you fight. Hear that, America, right? But sometimes, or the best way, the supreme excellence, the best way is to win without fighting. And you see this pattern recurring all throughout the art of war. And this is what I sort of key in on. In line 18, you see, know the enemy and yourself. And so when you're in a competition, it's not enough that you prepared yourself, but you gotta know who you're up against, right? So if you've ever played a sport, then you know you can just simply look at the opposing field, the opposing team, and try to see who the talented people are, who the less talented people are, who you got to watch out for. And I knew that the other team would do that to us too, which is why I'd always be clumsy and miss a lot, and just so it would give them a false impression of who they're up against, right? And I did that all the time. So know the enemy, know yourself, and you can kind of know how you're going to fare. That's it for this one. I'll see you in the next video.